Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for taking the time out for joining us for this Power Hour discussion. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon what part of globe you are joining in today. We are seeing that attendees have started signing up for the event, have started joining the webinar event. So we'll probably give them another 30 seconds or so, and then we will start our Power Hour discussion. And once again, thank you very much for taking the time out for this Power Hour discussion. We want to make this to be an interactive session. So at any point of time, if you have any thoughts, questions, or comments, please feel free to type in the chat box or in the Q&A section. I, along with the panelists today, will try to answer those questions one by one. And if there's anything which is left unanswered, we will respond back to you via email and answer all of them. So looking forward to your contribution to the discussion. So today's topic is role of AI in supporting educators, role of artificial intelligence in supporting educators. I'll be your host for today. My name is Rahul, and I've been with Harbinger Group for the last 10 years. And in the e-learning industry, I've been there for the last 15 years. And I'm passionate about working with organizations, associations, and EdTech companies in solving this challenge of student outcomes, learning outcomes, student improvement. A few housekeeping tips before we get started. If you cannot hear the audio, ensure you have selected the right speaker for audio output. You can also test your speaker to ensure it is working fine from the audio settings. It's there on the lower left corner of your screen. And lastly, if necessary, please dial in using a phone. So what's our game plan for today? What are we going to talk about? We'll analyze the new role of the educator and identify areas where AI can pitch in. Then we'll also understand how to go about implementing an AI-enabled system for educators. Are there any pitfalls of implementing AI? We'll also touch base on that. And then we'll evaluate the possible impact of AI's intervention in supporting student outcomes. And with that, let me take the pleasure of inviting our panelists for today. We have 4 panelists today for this particular discussion. And I would request the panelists in the order on which we have the photographs on the screen. Please, if you could go ahead and switch on your videos, and please, if you could talk a little bit about yourself, because the audience would like to know about you, who you are, what you are doing. So first of all, let me welcome Ahmed. Thank you very much, Ahmed, for taking the time out for this conversation. We would like to know a little bit about you, please.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, Rahul. So my background is in engineering, and I worked in industry for a while, and then I switched to academia. And I've taught in multiple universities, primarily online in the last couple of decades or so. Right now, I'm teaching at American Public University System, and just prior to this, I was Dean of the School of STEM there. So running multiple programs, actually in each of the areas, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So this topic is of great interest to me and to our institutions, because it's key in supporting online students in particular, and students in general. Thanks, Rahul.
Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you once again. We would like to invite our second panelist for the day. Hi, Michael. Thank you very much once again for taking the time out to join us for this conversation. Please, we would like to know a little bit about you.
Yep. Thank you, Rahul. Thank you for, again, inviting me to another brilliant panel. Honored to be amongst the other panelists. In brief, I was born and raised overseas most of my life, educated here in the United States. Have spent the better half of my career working with education companies, taking them globally. So what we currently do now here at Global Expansion Strategies is we are an international growth and investment advisory firm. We work with early to mid-stage EdTech companies to expand globally. Our primary focus there is to accelerate growth globally, to then in turn at a certain point in time and date when the revenue justifies it, invest in any combination of A rounds or B rounds, specifically helping companies accelerate not only their roadmap, but growth and the adaptation of their technologies to the global markets. We've had quite a bit of success doing that. And we work predominantly with companies that are in the English language learning space, STEM specifically, robotics and programming, and career acceleration.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure having you on this panel.
Thank you, sir.
But take the opportunity to invite Ulhas. Ulhas, please, if you could talk a little bit about yourself, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, hi Rahul, good to be here. Hi Michael, hi Ahmed. Yeah, so I started my career with the Indian Army. I spent 10 years with the Army and then came down to CV Street. Equipped myself with engineering and management, and worked essentially on the business side, but predominantly in the fields of education and technology. So I worked across K-12, higher education, skilling, and was involved in implementing, deploying innovative technology-based solutions and platforms to enhance the teaching learning process. And I've also been a trainer, coach, and a mentor, and interacting with a lot of students. So that makes me a very passionate EdTech professional, and I'm looking at contributing in this teaching learning space. And look forward to a good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ulhas. It's a pleasure having you on this panel. Now we would take an opportunity and invite Harsha on the panel with us. Hi, Harsha.
Hi, Rahul. Thank you for having me on the call today. So to quickly brief about myself, having the background of engineering and be passionate about how the technology helps people to change and to actually automate a couple of things to the ease of operations. And being an EdTech professional over with 10 years of experience, have helped and worked with a lot of organizations to make use of educational technologies and different kind of product and services to help them for better outcome, student outcome, and leverage technology in a way so that they can ease out the operations. Currently working with Harbinger to value add that experience and flourish more onto the EdTech space to talk more about this, where you can help the organizations, educational institutions to leverage technologies in a way so that they can actually have educators and institutions good time to focus on something new like AI that we are talking today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harsha. Thank you so much for being here on this panel with us. So once again, a very warm welcome to all the panelists and all the attendees. So we'll move ahead in our discussion. So first of all, let's spend some time and try and understand that what is the need of discussion on this particular topic? Why are we all gathered here to discuss about this? So there is this very interesting article published by McKinsey. This article specifically talks about the K-12 teachers, but we could actually confirm this with Ahmed, Michael, that this is going to be true for higher ed scenario as well, colleges, universities. And this article says that there are a couple of things happening. First of them is that the teachers are overworked. And it's true to a certain extent in every workspace of life, not just education, but I think every worker is overworked in these, the new normal that we call after the pandemic hit us. So they're on an average, teachers are working about 50 hours a week. But the flip side of it is, it's not the students who are gaining most out of it. Actually, this report says that only 49% of that 50 hours is being spent in direct interaction with the students. The rest of the time is going in a lot of administrative tasks. So that's the problem statement that we are looking at. Now, moving ahead, what is the opportunity that arises out of this? So from a technology perspective, we tried to look at this report and we thought that, okay, what are they saying about, what kind of opportunity can arise out of this? So this report itself says that almost 20 to 30% of their time can go towards activities that support student learning. So you remember the last infographic which said that 51% of time is being spent on administrative tasks. 20 to 30% of their time investment, which is currently going into administrative tasks, can go towards activities that support student learning. So we kind of, and when we invited this panel, we thought that we'll deliberate a little bit on this. We'll try and understand that how true this report is and what are the possibilities, and specifically within the technology, when we are talking about leveraging technology, how can AI help us? So that takes us to our first question of the day. And we would request Ahmed to share his thoughts here. So Ahmed, what is the new role of an educator these days?
Thanks, Rahul. Well, in the past, instructors, teachers, professors spent most of their time in delivering content. Well, that has changed substantially over the years. And currently, both from a perspective of student learning, as well as utilization of existing technology, the role of the instructor today is in helping students learn, which is different than delivering content, right? So helping students learn means being able to answer their questions, to explain things in various ways so that they have more than one way of understanding the particular topic that they're studying. And another very important role is that of assessing their performance. So being able to create the right assessments and then and get a good sense of where the student is in their learning pathway, and then being able to provide feedback, because it's very important, both positive feedback and where necessary corrective feedback, so that the student learning is increased. And one other role which it becomes difficult, it's difficult these days with the pandemic, face-to-face classes are more challenging and have decreased in numbers. But in asynchronous education, and typically online is asynchronous, in other words, students and instructors are not together in a live lecture, being able to answer student questions is when the question arises in the student's mind is very, very important, right? Because typically in an asynchronous environment, the student may be studying something at some portions of the day or night, and they have a question, they don't understand it, and they can't reach the instructor. It takes 24 to 48 hours for the instructors to get back. So those areas, being able to answer student questions, assess performance, and provide feedback, that's where the focus of the professions of professors and instructors is today. And as you mentioned earlier, there are a lot of administrative tasks. So anything in technology-wise, AI-wise, that can help support these initiatives of answering questions, assessing performance, and providing feedback would be extremely welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ahmed. I think you summarized it very nicely in terms of the three key things. We should take that as a key discussion today in terms of answering questions, evaluating performance, providing feedback. And specifically when you mentioned about answering questions, the logic that you mentioned that, when the student is in between something, and if a question arises in their mind, the impact on the learning of the student or the engagement of the student in that learning process would be much more if they get their responses, like promptly, literally within a few minutes or probably 30 minutes of they asking the question. That's one very important aspect, because while we have moved a lot of things into a blended learning environment or an online learning environment, there's also a talk about Zoom fatigue and the digital learning fatigue and whether the students are being engaged or not. And this is one point I think from a technology side we should look at as to how we can keep the learners engaged in their entire learning journey, keep the students engaged in their entire learning journey. So,
Rahul, if I may interject one more thing, when we talk about students generally, well, you mentioned K through 12, and we understand those or know about those students, but at the college level, people generally think of students in the 18 to 24-year range, which are the traditional college students, but there are a lot of adult working students, and for them, the challenges of managing their careers, managing their families and children and so forth is even greater. So in terms of being able to do asynchronous learning and provide them help when they need it, it becomes very important. Because the bulk of their time is not spent studying, it's spent doing other things. And so you have to sort of deliver learning or deliver instruction and have them learn in a concentrated and short time frame. Absolutely.
I couldn't agree with you more on this, that, this is very important, this classification of students, and that's where we wanted to keep our discussion focused today on the higher ed, university, college students, and some of those are non-traditional students as we talk. And Michael would recall in one of our previous conversations, we had specifically spoken about the traditional students versus the non-traditional students. So anyone in our audience who's kind of, our community colleges or universities or colleges which are preparing programs for workforce readiness and all those kind of things, filling in the talent shortage that we have, they should make a note of this important piece of information that Ahmed just shared with us in terms of why is it important to respond to the queries of the students, specifically the non-traditional students who are working adults. And that was very interesting. Thank you once again, Ahmed. So we'll now move on to the next question. And we'll turn to Michael for this, and we'll request to share him his thoughts here. That, you have, in your opinion, what are some of those key areas where an artificial intelligence can educators save time and instead help them focus more on students?
Yeah. For me, I think key areas would be in that sequence of assessing a student, diagnosing the student, and then subsequently prescribing a course of remediation. We all know that is heavily the burden of teachers these days. And so with artificial intelligence, if the assessment, the diagnosis, and the course of prescribed remediation can be done, then what it does is it gives the teacher more time to focus on those specific areas of deficiency with those students. Up until now, much of that has been on the shoulders of the educational community, teachers specifically. It takes a lot of time, very challenging. Not a lot of technologies out there that are doing it, at least not until recently where they are now. And so again, what it does is, following back on your previous slide, frees up time for the teacher to really work with those students in their areas of deficiency, thus allowing them to keep on their learning journey.
Thank you, Michael, for sharing those thoughts. I think for a moment, I felt like I was in a doctor's clinic, assessment, diagnosis, prescription. But I think the remediation part, that's very important because, we can set up everything, right? You can set up the best faculty, the best kind of resources, digital learning resources, synchronous, asynchronous learning. You can bring the best from the technology side of it and the academy side of it. But if you're not able to gauge, that's where you meant by diagnosis, if you're not able to gauge what has been the student outcome, and if you're not able to gauge that, identify the gaps, and then prescribe a remedial action to fill in those gaps, then there's something that we are missing on the table there. So again, I would totally agree with your point. And plus the other day you were talking about some story which kind of relates to this. Do you want to share a little bit about it?
Sure.
Yeah.
Were you asking me, Rahul?
No, I just refer to Ulhas.
Yeah, Michael, go ahead. If you have a story to add, sure, I will go.
Yeah, I mean, one of the areas where we've seen artificial intelligence have tremendous impact is with students overseas that are English language learners, either looking to improve their English language proficiency and or straight out English as a second language. Very challenging because there's really 4 components to learning English: read, write, speak, and listen. And with the complexity of all those, either as one-off solutions and or combined, teachers really need to understand where is the student having deficiencies. Sometimes students may be able to speak in English, but perhaps lagging in read, write, or listen, or vice versa. And so there's some tremendously advanced AI algorithms that have helped teachers in those schools diagnose specifically where those students are having those deficiencies And what it does is it improves the learning path for those students as they learn English, right? Because we've seen it many times before. Students graduate with a very basic understanding of English. And so if you can break those down, diagnose where they're having difficulties, address those difficulties, it just improves the outcomes of their English proficiency in the four areas: read, write, speak, and listen.
Thank you very much, Michael, for bringing that case. I think that's a very relevant case.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree, Michael. I think coming from where you are in terms of English speaking, I think all those four elements are extremely important. Yeah. So what I want to connect with is Ahmed mentioned that bulk of the time teachers spend on answering questions. And what comes to mind is Georgia Tech University. They realize the same problem, and they say, how do we free up teachers? And they created this conversational chatbot called Jill. And they spend a lot of time on Jill because first they had to collect all the frequently asked questions and answers, right answers, and upload everything onto Jill, and then had practice out Jill and how Jill would perform. And they had their learnings, and they found that the entire dump of questions had to be categorized and structured and made contextual for Jill to be coming up as a good assistant. And interestingly, what they did is they did not tell the students that somebody called Jill is an IA chatbot. They pitched Jill as another faculty. So Jill was listed along with all the other 10, 15 names of the faculty. And students were asked, free to access any of them. And they found that they were getting an equal share of questions in the beginning. And then slowly, as Jill was being more available than the other people, most questions started coming to Jill. And Jill became so real that over a period of time, people didn't know that Jill was a AI chatbot. And so the students were even asking, what is your favorite movie? What are you doing for dinner tonight? Stuff like that started happening. And it's really later that they realized that Jill was a chatbot. So actually, Jill Watson, I think it's a very famous chatbot story. And there is a TEDx talk also available. I think it's made by Professor Ashok Goel, who's the creator of Jill. So it's a very interesting and effective implementation of AI to free up a lot of faculty time. So I thought I'd share that. Yeah, thanks, Rahul.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for bringing that story up. Yeah, on the lighter side of it, I think I was told by someone that when the semester finished, the students wanted to take Jill out for a dinner or a lunch, something. And that is the time when the secret was disclosed that, hey, it's an AI-enabled chatbot. And but it brings us back to Ahmed's point of view that you need to answer the students when they're in their right at the moment of the need. As Josh Person says, learning in the flow of work. I think similarly in the education space, we have something which is like, answering questions to the students when they are in the flow of their study. So thank you for bringing that case study up. I think we can definitely connect some dots there. All right, so now we'll move ahead in our discussion. And we'll request Harsha to share. So Harsha has been working very closely with EdTech organizations, right from EdTech product companies to colleges and universities. And she has been part of some of these discussions wherein some of the challenges have been brought up and discussed. So we thought that we would pick Harsha's brain and request her to share couple of interesting examples wherein an AI-enabled tool or technology help automate the task and support the faculties. Of course, there are multitude of stories out there, and but just in the interest of time, if we can talk about a couple of them, Harsha, please.
Absolutely, Rahul. Thank you. So, in continuation with what Ahmed and Michael said, while going for asynchronous learning, and you have to make time for your students to give them that personalized learning scenario, to be available for them to answer their questions. On the second question where Michael mentioned that when it comes to adult learners and organizations need to help their educators with the technologies they can build. So that reminds me of a couple of examples into the industry that are actually working in this space and helping AI being the helpful technology to ease out the operations and solve challenges for instructors and educators to automate few of their tasks. And these are some of the relative tools, like to start with the first example, AI-enabled grading tool by CopyLeak. So this is an tool, AI grading tool that helps to automate and seamlessly analyze a few of the tasks for educators by making it easy and quick, accurate by using or grading the assessments, large written assignments and assessments. So I would say the motto here is to eliminate the discrepancies and human errors when it comes to grading and assessing the content created or answered by students. And it takes, so if we see at this traditional scenario of grading and assessing, it would take a lot of amount in terms of money and time for educators to assess these things manually. So by using this tool, you can get actually more accurate and unbiased responses. And I would say this will allow educators to focus more on what is important for their students and create some learning programs which are in line with student needs and leveraging the new personalized learning content for their users and being available for them. Second such example is AI-enabled assessment generation tool. So this is a product by Harbinger, and I would definitely say that it is one of its kind into the market at tech space. So Quillions is the world's first largest, or I can say a very first in its unique way, assessment generation tool where it is powered by AI technology and ML algorithms to create assessments, quizzes, questions, notes just by using simple text content. And the key differentiators which makes us unique is first, it is very fast and easy to use. Second, you can create the assessments just with 4 simple steps, process within seconds. And that is, I guess, the biggest point for educators, by not spending a much of time to create content and just simply give it a task to AI, that I would say a digital twin these days to create their content. Third, the APIs, which makes it more beautiful, because these days it is very important to see how you can integrate with other platforms. So the APIs that are available with Quillions is making it very easy and seamlessly available into the market. So I would say the product has been designed by keeping the user base in mind, like trainers, educators, instructors, EdTech developers, in such domains which are spending, as Rahul mentioned with the study, spending 50 hours a week and not getting the optimum result by just 49%. This will be, I guess, helpful, where you can get more learner-based, student-based outcome in a very best way. Thank you.
Thank you, Harsha, for sharing these examples. They were pretty interesting. CopyLeak, grade assessments, Quillions, assessment generation tool. I think I'll pick on one word, Harsha, that you mentioned about AI being unbiased. Just to, wear the devil's hat today, I wanted to move on to my next question, which is, somewhere related to this. So yes, at a technology level, AI can ensure that, the human errors, they can be mitigated, and, it gives you unbiased results and outcomes. But at the same time, there is some talk about AI-led programs, somewhat lacking in empathy, humanity, and collaboration opportunities. Not every AI chatbot is as popular as Jill Watson, let's say, for a moment. So we wanted to pick our panelists' brains on this. And with that, first of all, we'll go to Ahmed first, because Ahmed, in his day-to-day job and life, he's so close to the students. And we would like to get his views and opinions on this, whether this is true, to what extent, what he has been experiencing or hearing in the education domain.
Well, Rahul, the Jill Watson story that Ulhas mentioned actually reminds me that way back at the dawn of the AI age, if I may so put it, back in the late 70s, I think Joe Weizenbaum at MIT had created a program called ELIZA, which basically repeated what whoever was typing in the queries said. And it wasn't really about answering questions. It was supposed to be a therapist, a psychologist answering back. And everybody knew that it was a program. Yet a lot of people just developed, so to speak, a relationship with Eliza. And this is, back in the late 70s, early 80s. And Jill Watson, of course, is a much more evolved version of that. And moreover, Jill Watson was used specifically to answer questions in the computer science program where Ashok Goyal, the professor who developed it, was teaching. So in terms of being able to establish empathy, it can be done. It's not that hard in the following sense. Humans have a tendency to see patterns. I mean, they're pattern recognition machines. So even when there isn't a pattern, they'll impose a pattern on whatever they're seeing. So that's why you come up with all these sometimes weird theories about people explaining things. So in a similar fashion, if they're interacting with someone or something, right, they have a tendency to personalize that. People have names for their cars, and there's so many different examples, and for their computers. So I think it is possible to develop that kind of empathy, and especially if you're familiar with the video game market today, you will know that in addition to text-based interaction and voice interaction, you can actually have images, somebody's face on the screen. And in fact, there are some influencers in social media that are basically AI personalities. So it's possible to develop that. We seem to have got over the what used to be called the uncanny valley, where the person, the image almost looks like a person, but there's something weird about it, right? So you don't feel comfortable with it, or you feel sort of awkward. But we've got over that part, more or less, right? So it's possible to understand something like that. But Rahul, I'd go back to one piece that you said about being unbiased. I don't think that's actually the case. In fact, bias, AI today, as far as we know it, it's all algorithmic, right? We haven't been able to develop artificial general intelligence in the same sense or equivalent to human intelligence. So what you have got is actually super evolved expert systems, right? And so they're algorithmically designed. And so the design of the algorithm, the data that it considers, the data sets that are provided, they can be biased depending because, on what kind of data you select. So in fact, this is a big area in AI and AI ethics, is to say, how can you assure that the products that you are putting out don't have built-in bias? There've been numerous cases of this over the last decade or so, in policing, in terms of, just ordinary interactions and dispensing soap. I remember there was one, so where darker skin, the dispenser wouldn't dispense soap because it had been trained on, a different surface level reflectivity, right? So these kind of things can creep in, and it's very important to be aware of them and to actively look for them and eliminate them to the extent possible. So there is that particular aspect that I would ask, people developing these systems as well as those using these systems to consider, keep in mind.
This was extremely insightful. I think anyone in the EdTech domain, especially product companies who are looking to develop products by infusing AI into those, I think that these are great insights. That one part is that we can bring in empathy, and I think this MIT case that you spoke about, that was right at the time when probably I was born. So that it started back that time. So
thanks for reminding me how old I am, Harsha. Oh, sorry, Rahul.
So the empathy can be brought in, and we have cases right from the early days till today. And the thing that you mentioned about patterns, that's something very important, and AI kind of leverages that to a great extent. That humans have this tendency of, even if there isn't a pattern, they tend to impose a pattern on it. So I would totally agree with that viewpoint. But I think for all the EdTech startups or companies who are leveraging AI to develop products and all, this is a great insight on the ethics part in terms of how you develop the products and how you ensure that it's the ethical. And we'll come to that question when we talk about some of the pitfalls about implementing AI. That's where we'll talk a little bit more on this. But great insights. Thank you. Michael, we'll turn to you. And you have been in the EdTech space for so long, and I think you might have also experienced the technology evolving, AI coming into picture. Would you agree, disagree to this particular statements on the screen, or any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I would. I would say the success of our deployment of various solutions really has been predicated on the interaction of the teacher and the student. And so with artificial intelligence, that you have quite a bit of an alleviation of time on behalf of the instructor. So back to the assessment, diagnosis, prescribed course of remediation. With artificial intelligence, a lot of that is pulled off of the shoulders of the teacher, whereby at the end of that chain, once the teacher has a course or a diagnosis and a prescribed course for remediation, the teacher then in turn utilizes that to have that one-on-one interaction with the students, thus offsetting, the empathy, humanity, and collaboration opportunities. And so with artificial intelligence, at least being able to take a lot of that burden off, it really frees up that teacher to have that one-on-one interaction. Otherwise, it would be considerably difficult for the student to be able to take those types of diagnosis themselves and understand what to do with it.
Right. Thank you, Michael, for sharing that. I think that's another interesting insight that you shared on this particular point. So,
yeah. Can I just add something?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. So, as the pandemic fear is receding and as students are going back, there is more and more talk about the hybrid model. And I think the reason for hybrid model is exactly what Michael is saying. It has to be an intelligent combination of where we use, AI to free up teachers' time, and where the teacher uses, their time to add value to the entire learning process. Another thing is that if you ask a teacher, what is the most satisfying thing about teaching, and invariably you'll find that the teacher says the best thing is the connect with the students, and the reverse is also true. The students love the connect with the teacher, and they also love the connect with the peers, with the other students, So that element, I think, is something that, I think at least today AI has not been able to replace, or like Professor Ahmed was saying that, characters have been created and even that can happen. But yes, we have many solutions which can take care of the human angle to some extent. So I'm sure we could probably look at those if there is time. Yeah, thanks.
Yes, absolutely. And Harsha, we would like to know from you as to how pally you have been, or who are your best friends in the AI chatbot domain?
So I would say, just keeping the point aside of EdTech domain and saying, agreeing to what the panelists said, that yes, you can add few elements like empathy and humanity, but to a certain extent, it is not required. Because if we are saying you need to create a combination where you want to help educators to get automated stuff ready so that they can ease out the task, there's still a touch that needs to be there, while Michael said that you have to make a connect. So with that, you can add the points, but for the EdTech domain, it is not required. As this is, as per my understanding, that it is totally fine to have this combination of having the AI tools just to help and unload the task for educators to help them get the questions ready and the content ready, and where on top of it, the educators are helping their students to make best of it. Keep up. Going to your point as AI tool being your best friend, I would say I have seen recently somewhere that people are now using AI technology based digital twins as the hosts for some webinars, that they speak about the specific stuff very accurate. So they are using the AI technology for hosting a specific 2 hours webinar. It's a good point. Then I heard a story on Instagram that there is a person which is a robo, AI-based robo, and people were not aware of it until the news published that Macula is an robo, AI technology robo, which has 1 million users. So this is how people are changing the look and feel of seeing AI as a technology, but obviously with every space, we need to be careful how we are using it. As Ahmed also mentioned a couple of points, that we need to be careful enough to go for these patterns and technologies.
Very interesting, Harsha. I think you brought up a very interesting point for the panel. I think when we started, the topic of our discussion is AI for supporting educators. So I think what you're trying to say is focus on what we have in hand. We want to make sure that we free up the educators' time to spend time with the students and instructors. That's very valid point. And yeah, and that AI-enabled chatbot or AI product that you mentioned that could run webinars. So we can look at the option that from the next power hour, you can replace me with that AI-enabled chatbot, if that makes sense. And then we do not have to kind of encounter any human errors while sharing and all those things.
Absolutely, Rahul, so that we can have you in the panel domain or zone rather than going for host section.
Right. No, thank you. Thank you, Harsha. Once again, sorry, someone was saying something.
No, go ahead, finish up. I just had a comment to add.
No, I was actually going to come back to you, Ahmed, that, that point that Harsha mentioned regarding focusing on when we are talking about AI for supporting educators. AI for students is one thing where we might require empathy, humanization, those kind of things. But when we are talking about automating administrative tasks for supporting educators, would you agree to Harsha's point of view, or do you feel that there should be a balance?
Yeah, I think so. But the comment that I wanted to make was when we're talking about educators and students and sort of, an agglomerated mass, but really you have to segment the market. And the reason I'm saying that, for instance, I deal every day with in asynchronous learning environment with adult students, and they tend to be very transactional. They don't really care whether you're human or non-human. They want the answer to that particular question. They want to take the exam and they want to get their credential, right? So it's very, very task driven. As contrasted with, you go to college and you have all this college experience and you get really excited by the professor who's talking philosophy or computer science or math or English literature, what have you. That's a different dynamic. Being able to replace that dynamic is going to be harder, but there's the number, at least in the United States, the number of students at younger ages is decreasing, whereas the number of students who are working adults is increasing. So in terms of, for instance, an application, applying these technologies in the US, I would say that, and even within the entire US market and within the certain market segments, the opportunities are right. I would love to have tools today, right? That would help the students, because they sometimes get stuck on simple points, and it takes me a while to get back to them, as well as other instructors. And so if there was something that could answer their questions right away and explain things in more than one way. I'll give you an example. When we in the classes that we provide, we use lecture videos, basically where it's a math class, a basic college algebra, where somebody goes through the explains the concept, explains the procedure, solves a problem. But not every student gets it that way, right? So they go on YouTube and they look up a different way of the same. Everything in the world is on YouTube, right? I mean, there's nothing that is not on YouTube. So they just go to YouTube and look at multiple ways of explaining the same problem. And it's not just at the elementary level. I find that some of my engineering students in upper division classes, they will go to YouTube to look stuff up or learn things, right? So it's already there. Now, if you can make that process easier and more focused and more guided, like Michael was saying, that would be of enormous help. Because right now, not all students today have the ability to be able to distinguish when, because I've seen examples of that as well. Well, they'll give some example from the net and it's like, what are you thinking about? This is complete garbage, right? It's not based in reality. So they can be misled. This is where a tool that can help them and guide them in certain ways, like Michael was talking, would be very helpful.
Thank you. This is very interesting, and I think that that brings us to our next set of questions. And probably I'll request Michael to share some of his thoughts. So you heard the viewpoints around, on the empathy and the humanization part, necessary, not necessary. We just want to take some of your thoughts in terms of how do you think AI can handle some of the above shortcomings, if there are? And again, we can disagree that there are any shortcomings, but if there are, how can we handle those?
I think in some of the areas, I would say it would be sort of along the latter part of that assessment, diagnosis, prescribed remediation path, where there's additional tools for the teachers to utilize upon determining how to interact with the students based on what the assessment and diagnosis and remediation is. Right now, a lot of these engines are just pushing out data. Student is deficient here, deficient there, but if there could be some additional components to help offset how the teacher interacts with the students, specifically prescribed diagnosis, I think that could really handle some of the shortcomings.
That's a very interesting point, Michael, specifically that you mentioned about. And I think on that particular point, I would request Ulhas, have you experienced or seen any of these things in terms of how AI has been handling some of these shortcomings, and maybe in line with Michael's thoughts there?
Yeah, I was trying to connect with the earlier question, which talked about, empathy and emotions. And, I hear about this sentiment analysis. And so I was just going through one example. There's a company called Skodel. And, they have this application which is supposed to measure well-being of the students. So it's very interesting. So there's a case study of St. Margaret's Institute or school, I think it is, where there are about 750 students, and the ages between 12 to 18. And their challenge was, how to stay connected with the students during the remote learning period. And they went in and got this Skodel application. The Skodel application is very simple. Every student has a login, and you can create multiple groups, as in classrooms or any other category. And the teachers have a direct access to these students, and vice versa. So what they do is, keeping in line with the sentiment stuff, is they ask questions like, how are you feeling today? And to make it easy to answer, they provide, say, about 20 different emoticons. And these emoticons will, have these characters saying, happy, sad, angry, frustrated, okay. So there are multiple options, and the student can just click on one of them. So when they click on, let's say, happy, then the next screen will come up, which will have, why are you happy? What is it that's making you happy? And again, there'll be a set of emoticons, and is it because you slept too much? Is it because you had a good family time? Is it because you successfully completed a school assignment? Stuff like that. So a whole lot of stuff will come, and then they will answer it. And there's a third part, which is subjective, where, is there something about the experience you want to share with your teacher? Or is there something where the teacher doesn't know that you want to share? And then there's a little bit of a descriptive part. So this kind of interaction happened, 3 to 4 times a week with different groups. And what they found is at the end of it, it was very successful, and the teacher managed to continue to hold a good bond with the students. The students felt very better connected with the teacher and the organization, because they thought that they are building that bond in a very effective way. There were other students who thought that this was so good that they were not able to do this when it was a live class. So this provided them an opportunity to kind of get connected at a emotional, at a personal, human angle level. Yeah, so this was one example. The other one I thought was again to do with the software issue. So there was a case where we developed what is called as a thrustometer. So this is a case of a US Fortune 50 company which had 100,000 plus employees across the globe, and they had a in-house IT support department, small department. So the challenge was that on an average, something like 1,500 tickets support tickets were being raised every day. And it was too much too much of work on the support team. And they were never able to complete that. And there were long waiting lines and a lot of frustration and, dissatisfied customers. So the solution that was proposed was interesting. intelligent chatbot, AI-based sentiment analysis included, and the chatbot could handle all the routine support tickets, and rightly so. So the number of the tickets continued, but the resolution of the routine tickets happened through the chatbot, and the IT staff got time to focus on more important and complex tasks. But the interesting part was this frustometer. So this frustometer was measuring right from the beginning to the end in terms of how the frustration levels were going down, and rightly so. At the end of the entire exercise, they found that with quick handling of all the tickets, the frustrations level went down. And secondly, there was analysis being done, and the AI chatbot was learning and improving day by day. So they were really getting satisfied, and they did not really have to go back to the IT department. I mean, the chatbot was built in such a way that firstly, it was able to handle multilingual questions. And secondly, if required, it could directly connect with the IT department. So all that happened, and the frustration really went down. So this is another example where some level of sentiment connect also kind of happened because of technology. Yeah, Rahul, I thought I'd share these examples.
Thank you. Very interesting cases. And the thing that you mentioned, it's called frustometer, right? Is that what you said? Right.
Frustometer.
So there's so much talk about student well-being, mental health. I think some of these things, could be relatable to, our context as well. And just a quick time check. We have last 4 minutes. So what we'll do is we'll skip a few slides and we'll go to the last slide that we have, which talks about, on student outcomes. We will spend some time discussing on this. What impact can AI create on student outcomes? And I'll request, starting with Ahmed, if you can share your thoughts there. And while we are sharing our thoughts, I would request to the audience that if you have any questions, please feel free to please feel free to type them in the chat box and we'll answer them. And looks like this is, again, whenever we do a discussion on AI, it definitely overruns the scheduled time. So I think because for the sheer amount of discussion that it needs. So yeah, we'll do this. So Ahmed, please, if you can share some of your thoughts there.
Yeah, so that's an interesting area, Rahul. One of the typically a set of outcomes for a program or degree program or even a course gets specified. And I'll take the example of a degree program where there's some learning outcomes associated with the program. And then there's a bunch of courses that are supposed to be supporting those outcomes. But what doesn't get done is to actually break the top level outcomes down into subsets of outcomes and then actually build the course according to whether those particular outcomes are being achieved or not. So from my perspective, and that's a difficult thing to do, right? Take top level outcomes is students will learn teamwork. Well, in order to learn teamwork, and this is one, by the way, the teamwork outcome is part of a technical accreditation agency's requirement, right? And they will be sensitive to economic and environmental conditions and the design of systems and so on and so forth. How do you even get students to work on stuff that will lead them to that outcome? So the way that I would think would be to take the top level outcome, break it into sub outcomes. And then once you have that pathway or tree of sub outcomes and outcomes constructed, then you find out what material you want to teach. Now, this stuff that I just talked about, it's easy to say, it's really hard to do. So this is where I don't think an AI tool exists to my knowledge today, but if it can be used to create questions from content, I can see this being extended to help, first of all, to help with outcome mapping for a particular program, and then to assess, then to select the content that can be delivered, and then to assess student progress along that outcomes pathway, and having the ability to have the data consolidated in a single place instead of being distributed across multiple instructors. They can still look at that data in an integrated fashion. I think that would be very helpful. My one caution over here is sometimes there's a tendency to look too much on the data, and we get into this mode of surveilling students, which is not what you want to be doing. You don't want to limit their opportunities. You want to open up their opportunities. So again, it ties back a little bit to the ethical side of things, but I think there's a lot of power here with AI tools that can help student learning.
Right. Thank you. Michael, your thoughts, please.
Real quick, I think AI is going to have a huge impact on student outcomes, simply because we're starting to see tremendous progress in that entire value chain, or in that throughout that whole chain, the assessment, diagnosis, and prescribed remediation. Prior to the pandemic, students were struggling in school. There are statistics and discussions to say that the pandemic has caused students to fall back 1 year. Personally, I think from just observations and discussions with schools, leaders, and stakeholders throughout the globe, it's more than a year. So I think artificial intelligence is going to have a huge impact on getting those students back up to the levels to where they need to be prior to the pandemic, and if not better.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael. And we do understand you have to leave for your next meeting. So once again, thank you very much for having being with us on the panel.
Thank you so much for having us. And again, honored to be amongst the panelists today.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye. And Ahmed, just a quick time check. Are you okay staying back for another 2 to 3 minutes while we wrap up?
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, sure, right. So
on the student outcome, again, if you go back to the Georgia Tech University, so while they have, I will not go into details, but while they have implemented a fantastic tracking system to map the entire student learning experience, and also, use adaptive learning tools to make learning, very personalized and all that, they have actually reported figures on 3 counts. One is in terms of increased attendance, other is in terms of increased graduation rates, and third is in terms of increased performance. So I think it's a direct correlation. And Michael was saying, that AI surely needs to come in to kind of make these kind of impacts at a very broad level. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Ulhas. Harsha, any comments from you on this particular one?
Just quickly adding to the point, what all the other panelists said, yes, the AI is already creating the impact. And as we discussed today, that's the examples, the discussion we had, the result is there. So what we can expect is more impact on the student outcomes, by using more AI such technologies into the industry. So looking forward to that.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. So moving ahead in our discussion, we'll quickly wrap up this. And again, a quick note to the audience, if you want to type in any questions, please do that. So what are the key takeaways that we looked at today? We looked at some of the areas where an AI-enabled support system can be implemented for educators, possibilities of bringing the human angle AI-driven support system. And again, we'll have to balance it, what are the areas wherein we need this humanization and what are the areas where we don't need this humanization. And evaluating the possible impact of AI's intervention in supporting student outcomes. I think Ahmed's point was very critical. We do not have to make AI a surveillance tool rather than a support system we have to generate out of this. So these are the key takeaways. And once again, moving ahead, I would like to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about Harbinger Group. This Power Hour was brought to you by Harbinger Group. Harbinger Group was established in the year 1990, so more than 3 decades of experience. We do have customers across the globe, but in the EdTech space, we primarily work in the North America market, ranging right from EdTech product companies to skilling platforms to higher education domain to K-12 domain. We are a little over 800 plus employees with dual shore operations with offices in US and India. At a group level, we have 3 companies: Harbinger Systems, that's the product engineering services arm; Harbinger Knowledge Products, where we develop products for educators. And a couple of them, I think one of them Harsha spoke about, Quillians. The other one is Raptivity, or Rapid Interactivity Builder Tool. And the third business unit is Harbinger Interactive Learning, where we create interactive digital learning content for students and professionals. And yeah, once again, you have the names of the panelists on the last screen. And if there's an email ID. If you have any questions that you want to write to us, please do write to us on those questions. And if you want to connect to any of the panelists, please do drop us a note and we will help you in connecting with the panelists to get answers to your specific questions. Once again, thank you very much, everyone, for taking the time out for joining this conversation. Ahmed, specifically, thank you very much. It was very insightful for hearing from you as to what the educators are feeling, what are the real needs of the students. And Ulhas, thank you so much for your time and those wonderful case studies. And Harsha, very valuable insights and some of the examples that you shared about. And balancing the fact that whether we need personalization or not personalization, that was very interesting. So thank you everyone for all your time. I hope
thank you everybody. Thank you, Ahmed.
Thank you everybody. It was a pleasure to be part of this panel. Thanks. Take care.